Righty. And I will move us so we can be seen. When we started way back, and I know not everybody's been able to be here. Freddie's had times out teaching, and Clay came in later on, and Megan came in tonight, so we're extremely glad. And I wondered, I mean, you asked for prayer for getting a new position, and then I thought, well, the first thing that happens is she's got to be gone on Sunday. Maybe we should go back and request that the Lord change all that. But so this will make up for it. But we said there are 3 parts to biblical study. And the first part, of course, has got to be we make real observations. And we spent a lot of time on that. We had 9 sessions, 10, 11 sessions, I don't know. And the whole point there was we got to see what the Bible actually says. Once we've seen what it says, because it's so dangerous, usually when you ask people a question about what they believe, they'll start by just telling you what it is that they think about this or that, but they won't necessarily take you back to the scriptures and prove that this is why, that would be a legitimate thing to do. And so you first have to get that part right. And once you've got observation right, that's certainly not the end of Bible study. Then you have to do the interpretation part. But better observations, you're always going to have better interpretations. And then the interpretation is the what does it mean part. And there are a lot of things that we looked at. We have to think about context, and we have to sometimes go to some special help. We have to think about the language and the history and just a lot of different things that are going on, and how words are used and so forth. Then we can figure out what it means, at least what it meant when it was given. Then we have to come bring it up to date and say, what does that mean in our day? Let's say we don't have slaves, we don't have, an emperor, and a lot of things that would be current topics. It's not a huge issue for us with people sacrificing animals at temples of idols and getting all worked up if you ate the meat that you bought from those places. But all those translate into things in our day. Then we got into application. And as we finished up last time, we had some questions about application. This is not purely part of the last lesson, but we finished up by asking, is there any example for me to follow? So as you read, the application is the part God really wants us to get to. And so we looked at the last time the idea of meditating on the scriptures, and that's of course helped by memorizing a little bit of it, and then practicing the scriptures. And that's what we said in Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. 8 has to do with taking all the good things that we've heard about and meditating on these, think on these things. In fact, it's a practice that we often recommend. If somebody's troubled over something, the earlier verses in that chapter, verses 6 and 7, for people who are anxious, they need some way to fight against that. And so what do? You may be anxious over something. You may be controlled by some difficulty. Freddie and I were talking the other day. He reminded me of a guy, in fact, I think he was an engineer, who was so upset every day on his way through traffic. Every time he'd get behind people and he would struggle at the traffic lights and the red lights and all that kind of thing, and he would just fly into road rage. And so the counselor had to show him how he could start making a think and do list, and just how many things he could be thankful for, how many things he could praise the Lord for, because that's earlier in Philippians 4, and begin to take some of those things and pull out some memory verses. He started putting those on 3x5 cards and putting them like up in his visor in the car. And eventually he said, I actually have gotten to the point where I look forward to those red lights and being stopped in traffic because it gives me time to flip those things open and to study them. So it had completely removed all of the rage and the anxiety that he had. Why? Because when you get down to verse 9 of Philippians 4, it says, if you'll do these things that I've been talking about, all these things throughout the chapter and the whole book really, do these things and the God of peace will be with you. A lot of things, when you look back in like verse 6, and it says, a peace that passes understanding will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus by lifting up thankful prayers. Now, I'm a guy, worked for years and years, consulting engineer. I like figuring out how things work. And I would love to be able to tell you, this is the way this works. But here's the thing. I can't figure it out. God says it passes understanding. The Apostle Paul wrote that. And so it doesn't matter if we can understand how it works. It matters that we know it does work. If you'll do these things, the God of peace will be with you. So that's what we really mean when we're talking about the whole issue of application. We're putting these things into practice in our life because the Lord told us to, and because we can trust that He loves us and He wants good things for us. And if we will do it, He actually knows how this whole world was set up. So it's not a matter of Him sort of flying by the seat of His pants and tossing these things out there and maybe it'll work. Like we talk about people practicing medicine, and we often make fun of that sometimes because it does seem like that's all they're doing is practicing medicine. So is there an example to follow? There might be opportunities to look at the biography of somebody's activities through the Bible pages, and some are for the good and some are bad. Just finishing up 2 Chronicles last week, and one of the incredible stories that you see, Hezekiah comes along and he does just wonderfully. He sort of has a little tailspin right at the end, but he did a lot of really wonderful things, got rid of a lot of idol worship and everything. And then here's the pattern that you see. Somebody will come along and it'll be just terrible climate, and somebody will do it right. And then for a number of years, the country will sort of follow them and do really well. And then all of a sudden, somebody else will come along. So Manasseh came along afterward, and he was terrible. He did everything wrong that you can imagine, and he finally got carried off in captivity. And then he completely changed, and he was brought back, and the rest of his life ended up he finished very well. He started out bad, but he finished well. Most of the time, it's the other way around that we see it with these fellows. They had lots of access to money and whatever they wanted and power, and so it would often go to their heads. Think of Solomon. He started out so well, and then by the end, he really got turned aside by all of his about 1,000 wives that all had different religious beliefs and came from different places, and he married them for political alliances, and it was a powerful way to build relationships, but he turned out not so well at the end. And so, but Manasseh turned it completely around. Now there's a biography you can study and say, wow. And then we're so quick to point out some of the faults of people like David and Abraham, but they ended up overwhelmingly doing some good things but being haunted by some bad things. And so we can learn from all those. Any sin that the Lord wants me to avoid, the pages of the Bible are filled with them. Any promise to claim, any prayer to repeat was in Nehemiah today. And Nehemiah chapter 1 is a good example of that. And any command to obey, any condition to meet, any passage to memorize and sort of personalize it, an error to mark, or a challenge to face. Those are all in last week's stuff, and it's still up on YouTube, so you can go back and review. I won't have to spend a lot of time there. So good interpretation leads to good application. Good observation leads to good interpretation. So assuming that we've done everything right all the way through, we're ready now for some application. And I want us to look in a particular passage, Matthew chapter 5. And there are a lot of things you could do, but Matthew 5. Should have moved my little marker here. You know, pastors cheat a lot. We have it written down on our notes in here anyway. And this is very similar to a passage I just preached on because it mentions light and salt and light. So let's look in verse 13. Move my marker up here. And Jesus, of course, we're in the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying a lot of things here. And if you have a red letter edition, it's full of red because he just keeps talking. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You're the light of the world. A city that's set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That's as far as we're going to go right now, but just sort of a little background. If you think about putting the Word of God into practice, that's really the emphasis here. And I got an email from Josh Hunt some time back, and here's a quote from it. The test of a good lesson is not how people think or feel or even what they decided to do while they were in class. The test of the lesson is what they do when they're outside of class. The goal is always changed lives to the glory of God. And that's what Jesus did when he sent us out. Matthew, at the end of Matthew, when he gives the Great Commission, he says, you're supposed to teach people to obey whatsoever I've commanded you. He didn't say, teach them all of the things that I commanded you, but to obey all the things that I've commanded you. And there's a huge difference. You could get really smart, but God did not give us the scriptures so that we would all become better, smarter students, because that's not the end product that he's looking for. He's looking for husbands who know how to love their wives and their children more, looking for servants or slaves as they are, which would be like employees who know how to do more and be responsible, looking for worshipers who love the Lord more, looking for Christians, basically, who act more like Christians so that it becomes interesting to other folks. And so that's sort of a lead-in to what we have here. So the context, Sermon on the Mount, and he gives us two real metaphors to think about. One is salt and one is light. Obviously, we're not literally salt and we're not literally light, but there's something about those that he wants to compare our task in life to. So what do you think just looking at it, and I know that you haven't had a lot of time to think about it, what comes to your mind? Let's just start with the salt one. What's the number one thing that usually comes to your mind when you're thinking about salt in the Bible? Purity? Could be. It was used for healing and some things like that. It was even used for currency in some places because it was valuable. But why was it so valuable? A preservative was number one on the list. And so there's something about our lives that ought to be preservative, right? That would be certainly the case if we were talking about us taking the gospel out to people and presenting them with the plan of salvation and them receiving Christ and that kind of thing. But I think there's more to it than that. You can look at our culture, and there's been a disintegration of sort of Christian morals. There was a time when you didn't have to be a Christian in this country, but you couldn't help be overwhelmingly affected by Christian morals because enough people all around you were sort of herding you back in line. And that has disappeared. And so part of the preservation part is you could read story after story, like the story with Manasseh and the devastation that came on their country when the leadership went downhill and when all those people who were the political movers and shakers and then the common people followed after them and got away from the Lord. What happened? The Lord would always bring their enemies in to sort of make it clear to them that that was not the right path. And it wasn't as if he liked the things that the enemies were doing. Many times he would have them destroyed later by some other group because the way they went about their task of discipline was so ruthless that they had to also be put in line. But when God's people step out of line, there's often terrible consequence. That's what the whole end of the book of Deuteronomy is about. If you do the things that I'm telling you to do, all these wonderful things will happen. If you keep disobeying the things that I've asked, these terrible things will happen. So if we don't, it's not as if we want to live by a bunch of rules or anything. It's just that if God said this is the way it is, and he really knows, it'd be pretty foolhardy to go against what he's taught us. And so that's where we start thinking about a preservative aspect. But that's only one of them. I don't want to hog all of our time by going on and on one item. But what else could we say? But there is cause and effect that takes place. What else happens with respect to salt? Sure stings when you put on a wound, but that's meant to be a good thing. I guess there's probably a lesson that we could take there as well. So repentance is not the easiest thing when we're in the middle of doing something wrong, but it does lead to healing. What else do we see with salt? Why do you use salt? Yes, it makes things taste better, right? And it does bring out flavor. In fact, I've, because I've had a long history of blood pressure and issues and so forth, I'm accustomed to not eating much salt. And so I've also noticed too much of it can make something really taste bad. I'm sure none of us Christians would ever be guilty of doing something like that to somebody. But what are we talking about? What's Jesus' big subject here? He's not really talking about salvation if he's saying that you're to be salt and light. He's talking about having a good testimony. If we make serving the Lord look like it tastes good, like it's a flavor that we could appreciate, like it brings out the good flavor of everything else that it's sprinkled on, that's certainly going to be a lot more interesting to people than if we come across the other way, harsh and abusive and all those kinds of things that Christians often get accused of, and frankly, because sometimes we are. So we need to think about that we're here to be salt in the sense of flavor as well. And I know Brother Clay and I've talked about this once in a while. You don't know what goes on Sunday morning when we have our brief exchanges, but it's often on the subject of trying to stay out of various fights that are going on different places. And so it's just one of those things, especially when you're in a leadership role at a church. That's one of the things people are going to be looking at. And if you're the kind that's constantly getting into a fight or something, that's going to be a problem. So salt can irritate, it can heal, but it can also make things taste really good. There's this saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you can throw a little salt on its tongue, and it'll get real interested in having a drink. And so that's kind of part of what we're to do too. We lay it out there in front of people to make them, well, I would be interested to know if that's what God is like. There have been a lot of other folks. Remember the quote that sometimes gets passed around, Gandhi, who was famous for, being peaceful and nice and all those things. He made this statement about Christianity. He says, I like their Christ, and then he wasn't so sure about the Christians. And I suspect that had something to do with, where he lived and the treatment that they had received at the hands of England and so forth. But he had an issue with Christians, and we should make sure that we're the kind of people that make that not happen. So what about light? Little history. They usually built cities up on hills. So when he mentions that city on a hill, that's what he means. We would think about that. It would just be a natural thing. And the same thing would be true. I remember Howard Hendricks talking about, and that's what we were going through, his Living by the Book has all of these things in it. He was saying, I've been to people's homes when they were doing some remodeling, and so you go in there and everything's cleaned out, and they've just put in wall-to-wall carpeting or whatever it is, and you walk in. I've never seen a big old hump in the middle of the living room floor and say, what in the world is that? And, that's my new lamp I just bought. And so we don't stick it under there. We make sure that it's up in the air and it's shining out for everybody to see, because that's what they're for. And so he's obviously saying, in the same way that we are salt to do these things, we're also supposed to be light. And so what comes to your mind when you're thinking about light that we would like to be?
Well, I kind of look at it like you don't want to shine for what you're doing, but what you're doing for the Lord.
Yeah.
So not to say, look at me, look at what I'm doing, but look at what I'm doing for the Lord.
And that was one of the things that Jesus got onto the Pharisees often about, because they seemed to always be pointing to themselves. And when Jesus wraps this up, he clearly has that in mind, because he says, let your light so shine before men. So it is about testimony, and it is about letting your light shine. But the purpose is that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. If they're, I've said this a lot of times, if you could be the nicest neighbor, the nicest person, the nicest coworker, family member, whatever it is, and tomorrow you could be gone, we could be holding your funeral service or whatever, And you could be so nice that thousands of people show up because you were so nice. But if all they think because of that is, he sure was nice, or she sure was nice, that would really not be accomplishing the mission. They need to understand that the reason you're not the way you were from day one, when you were under the power of the prince of the power of the air, is because Jesus changed you and gave you a new life. And so I'm only as nice as I am because the Lord did this to me. And so I'm doing these things not to be pointed at, but so I can point to Him and give glory to the Lord and what we hope here is that we'll get some other people to glorify the Lord as well. So that really is, that's the number one thing that Jesus has in mind. There's another issue going on here. If you read verses 13 all the way down through 16, there's a kind of a theme with the pronouns that you see. Anybody notice that? Mr. English, notice anything there? Yeah. Who does he want involved in all this? This is not like a rule book and sort of spouting off, whatever, or even like an ideal to aspire to. He's saying, I want you to do this. You're supposed to be the salt. With your background, your hang-ups, your limitations, the fact that you've only grown so far in your life. And Freddie was in his college ministry talking about the fact that you can disciple somebody early on, even if you aren't very far ahead of them. And so sometimes that keeps people from wanting to do anything because they think, I don't know enough to do that. What if I do something wrong or lead them astray or something? Not very likely that you'll lead them astray as long as you're trying to learn and advance. Be much worse to say, I'm going to wait till I know everything, because you will be long dead and in heaven and you still won't know everything. You'll know more, but you won't know everything, because it's not like you're going to turn into God. That's only the Mormons. So it's the you with all those things in your history and all those things that you fail at. You're the one who can be salt and have a testimony before people. You're the one who can be light and shine that light, reflect the light of Christ so that we can point people back to the Father. And he says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. They can't see what you're thinking. They can only see the things that you're actually accomplishing, your good works, and glorify your Father in heaven. So that's the whole big picture. Any other things that you would like to bring out on this particular passage? There's some pretty heavy stuff right there in verse 13.
Almost sounds like it's your responsibility to make sure that nothing happens to the world, that your flavor, salt, will, if you lose it, if everybody loses it, then what? So it's almost like your responsibility.
And I think a lot of that is you got to read into this. It's my testimony before people. What happens when we mess up? When you're the mega church TV pastor who gets caught with whatever that you weren't supposed to, money or adulterous women or whatever it is, and you become national news. You've lost that good flavor, haven't you? Then it's good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. In other words, that's how they're going to see it. That's why if you read, a passage like 1 Timothy 3, and you're reading about qualifications for deacons and for pastors, one of the things that they're looking for is people that have not become like the talk of the town in a negative way, because it's going to be hard to have a positive influence if that's happened to you. And and we know how quickly things can happen like that. And it's a frightening thing. They don't even really have to happen. You can just be accused of something, and suddenly it seems like your whole opportunity for ministry in that area has just gone up in smoke because nobody's listening anymore. And if they do listen, it'll only be to jeer or, point in some kind of negative fashion.
And regardless of its goodness,
Yes, yeah.
years and years and years.
As they say about when you say something negative or mean, it takes like 13 goods to overcome it, or whatever number they've come up with. I'm not sure that there are enough goods in some cases. Certainly not when it comes to ministry. I don't know how many times you'll be talking to somebody and they'll bring up, oh, I know a guy I work with or whatever it is, and he's a Christian and he's a dirty scumbag and he cheats people at work and whatever it is. And so you're just thinking, that guy, he's not even here. And he ruined my opportunity to give testimony for Christ. So it is a dangerous thing. It affects business. Certainly at home, we can't impact people with something that we don't have. We have to get out and to be able to see people and to minister to them. There's another thing about salt and light that's an interesting thought. If you told us to be like gold and silver, or something like that, those are precious things, and what would we say? That's fine. Not too much of that around my house. But what about salt and light? Those are like everyday, ordinary items, aren't they? I mean, when you think about how your testimony is supposed to affect people, it's every day. It's not meant to just blast them out of the water or everything, but it's something that we do every single day. And so we don't want them to think that we're only good on Sunday or whatever it is. As the saying goes, since we have a deacon here, many times somebody will tell the story about how, the pastor, he gets paid to be good. The deacons are good for nothing. And meaning they don't get paid, or maybe meaning something else. As a former deacon, I always appreciated that, by the way. But it means for every Christian, we don't just put on a fake testimony for Sunday, but it's an everyday salt and light kind of thing that we do in front of people. And it is difficult because you know how easy it is, to get backed into a corner and to do something that you shouldn't have done. And so that's the point where we just have to admit, shouldn't have done that, and then do it right the next time. I also think it's important to realize that you don't quit just because you stumbled at one particular point. You just keep doing it every day, because every day the sun comes up, and so it doesn't matter that it was cloudy yesterday. The sun's going to be out again, and so it's going to happen over and over again. Any other things to cover in this passage? I want to mention again, we have not pushed this because during COVID limitations and just not even having a place to meet. But I am very interested still in getting rolling on our good book club again, where we're just reading the Bible, not you reading it at my pace or me reading it at your pace, just reading during the week, marking places that affected you, and then we share them for about 10 minutes each as we meet. And so you would meet like together as a big group just to introduce it, and then break into 2 people at a time and just saying, let me read through the things that really got to me last week. Not preaching to anybody, so even non-denominationally, it could be extremely valuable, but it's a way of making sure that you're studying, and it's a way of holding somebody else accountable for at least doing something. I think Freddie was meeting most of the time with us and just consecutively reading, which wasn't the idea out of Genesis, as we had different meetings, but of course he's in seminary and you're not allowed to read anything in seminary because you have a stack of books like this. But the idea is, whether you start in the New Testament or the Old Testament, that you cover whatever hunk of Bible, and it's you that get to decide the pace and how much you're going to read. And then the rest of it is just the excitement of being able to share. This is something I noticed. I never noticed it before. Never heard anybody preach on that before. And so, like the thing with Manasseh and doing well. I had thought about that in the past, but because I just read it this past week, it really hit me, that that's a wonderful picture of where a lot of people are. They could start out with all the wrong things. They could do everything wrong. They could grow up like atheistic like I did, and then all of a sudden the Lord gives them an opportunity to be different, and they take it because they say, where I was and where I was going before was just not working. And so it's good that the Lord let me start over again, regardless of whether anybody else in the whole country is doing it. And then maybe some will. All right. Any other comments? Well, good. I enjoyed looking at this subject of application, and next week we get to finish up, and then we will really be doing some application, because I'm going to start taking us through some passages and asking some questions, sort of like we did several years ago when we were looking at the order of service and the church calendar, and thinking, what kind of things is the church supposed to do, and when, and how, and do we do these just because we do them, or do we do these things because the Lord actually told us that we should? All right.